Welcome into NFL Live. We have some breaking news right off the top. Let's welcome in Adam Schefter. Adam, what's going on with Terry McLaurin?
Michelle, as it turns out, Terry McLaurin did not show up to the Commanders training facility for the start of training camp with the other veterans. The Commanders took a conditioning test. Terry McLaurin was not there for the start of it. He's been seeking a new contract that he does not yet have. And when the Commanders reported for work today, Terry McLaurin was not spotted there. Now, he could decide to show up tomorrow. He could decide to show up any day this week. But he was not there on the first day that veterans and rookies reported for work. At that time, he has been seeking a new contract. He voiced his displeasure and frustration with the team last week. There's the tweet. There's the official information about Terry McLaurin not being there for the start of the offseason program, but he did not report, was not there for the start of training camp today in Washington.
Well, a lot to get to here on NFL Live. I'm Michelle Smallman alongside Damian Woody and Mike Tannenbaum. Mike, what do you make of Terry McLaurin not showing up to camp today?
Well, hopefully, Michelle, it's just a bump in the road. Obviously, Terry McLaurin is one of the better receivers in the NFL. Great stat. Over the last 6 years, he's led the NFL in contested catches, and he has a big catching radius. He's a big physical receiver. Washington's had a tremendous offseason when you think about adding Deebo Samuel, Laramie Tunsil, drafting Josh Connerly in the first round. So with an improved Jaden Daniels in his first full offseason, I expect this team to be very productive, compete meaningfully with Philadelphia, the NFC East. They have to get this figured out. And most recently, we saw somebody, D Wood, like Garrett Wilson get $32 million a year. So there's probably a sweet spot in there. I don't see him at the $40 million a year like a Jamar Chase, but I think there is a sweet spot in there where they can increase his compensation based on how productive he's been. This is somebody that has 460 career receptions, and he's a glue guy. And again, given how productive Dan Quinn and Adam Peters have been in Washington, I would like to think they'll get this figured out.
Yeah, listen, I'm not, if I'm, someone within their organization, I'm not in panic mode right now. It's the first day of training camp. As we get closer to the regular season, then that'll obviously change. But when you think of a guy like Terry McLaurin, think about what this guy has meant to the organization. Think about how many different regimes he's been a part of and the type of good soldier that he's been within the organization. Obviously, Jaden Daniel comes in and flips the whole thing on top of his head and the type of productivity that Terry McLaurin had with Jaden Daniel. So, obviously, this is not ideal. You want to make sure you want to come into training camp with everyone signed and everyone ready to go. But I would expect the Washington Commanders to get this thing figured out sooner rather than later.
Listen, when you don't show up for training camp also, there's a financial ramification to it. Terry McLaurin now will be subject to a $50,000 a day mandatory fine, as will Trey Hendrickson and any other player that doesn't show up for camp. And that's why we've seen over time some players show up to training camp and then essentially hold in, not practice. They're there. They can't take the $50,000 a day mandatory fine because they are there. And that's a way of trying to get around the system. Now, this, again, with Terry McLaurin and the Commanders, is a little bit of a complicated negotiation because Terry McLaurin will tell you, and his numbers bear out, that he's one of the best receivers in football. We've seen this offseason. Big money deals go to T. Higgins at about $29 million a year. We've seen DK Metcalf and Jamar Chase get over 30. McLaurin's numbers compare to many of these receivers. But then you also see another great wide receiver, Mike Evans, who is a little bit older than Terry McLaurin, get $24 million a year. So is Terry McLaurin north of 30? Is he around the Mike Evans number? I'm sure he and his agent would tell you no chance, much closer to the number above 30. But it's up to these two sides to figure it out. And right now they've been unable to do it. And Terry McLaurin making a statement by not showing up for the conditioning test that took place this afternoon at the Commanders training facility at 3 Eastern. He was not there for that test. Trey Hendrickson, meanwhile, has made progress, but that is not for a new contract. That is progress on a trip to Jacksonville. He has left Cincinnati, driven to Jacksonville, and arrived in Jacksonville. Made great progress there, not nearly as much with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals have offered him 1 year of guaranteed money, whereas some of the other top pass rushers have gotten 3 years of guaranteed money. And Trey Hendrickson insists he will not come in and play for the last year of this current contract that's scheduled to pay him $16.5 million. So, again, another impasse with a player that certainly seems unhappy with where things are. We heard Mike Brown come out and say that Trey Hendrickson has not exactly been easy to deal with here. So both sides not pleased with each other. And this is a holdout right now that has no end in sight.
Well, let's take a look at some of the numbers. Trey Hendrickson has the third most sacks in the NFL over the last 4 seasons. However, look at where his average salary ranks in 2025 among other top edge rushers. He ranks 11th, while others around him are in the top 5. And then there's Micah Parsons' guys in 67th. And Schefter mentioned it earlier, but here's Bengals owner Mike Brown on negotiating with Trey Hendrickson.
Trey Hendrickson is a fine player. He's a good guy. We want him here. Dealing with him is sometimes not so easy. That's all right. He's got the right to argue his case.
All right, Damian, you heard the sound there. What do you think of Mike Brown saying Trey Hendrickson is, quote, not so easy to deal with?
Well, you're definitely not helping the situation by saying those type of things. And here's the thing that jumps out to me is that the Cincinnati Bengals made some significant progress early in this offseason. Think about it, the signing of Shemar Chase and T. Higgins. That went a long way towards, people, the perception of the Cincinnati Bengals. Then all of a sudden, you go back to the Bengals bangling again with Trey Hendrickson. And this isn't something that the Cincinnati Bengals didn't know about. Trey Hendrickson's been asking for a new deal for 2 years now. 2 years. And so here it is, a situation where the Bengals last season wasted an all-time great season by Joe Burrow, with their awful defense. Now you got the Trey Hendrickson situation going on. On top of that, their number 1 pick hasn't even reported to training camp. And so you're the Cincinnati Bengals, which, by the way, they've been notoriously slow out of the gate. This is the last thing you want to see is your star pass rusher not reporting to training camp.
Look, he may be hard to deal with, but I would say this to Mike Brown. Yes, you've been productive with T. Higgins and certainly Shemar Chase, but get Trey Hendrickson in a room with his agent as soon as the season is over. We just look at this graphic. They cost themselves $7 million. And if the 3 of us were running the Bengals, guys, we knew that T.J. Watt, who was born within 2 months of Trey Hendrickson, was going to get a new deal. When you look at what Pittsburgh did in the offseason between Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, and everybody else, T.J. Watt was getting nowhere. I would have had a massive sense of urgency to get Trey Hendrickson signed at a lower number before T.J. Watt signed. So what was Nick Bosa at the end of last year at $34 million is now 34 goes to 41. And to me, as good as Cincinnati's done in the offseason by waiting, they have cost themselves dearly. They have 0% chance to win without Trey Hendrickson this year. With him, they have a meaningful chance to make a deep playoff run. That's how impactful he is.
Well, let's go back to Adam Schefter. Adam, Trey Hendrickson, not the only issue happening in Cincinnati. What's going on with first-round pick Shemar Stewart, who's still not been signed?
Yeah, look, there are various viewpoints on this particular issue, but the Bengals want to include language that other teams have included in their rookie contracts regarding forfeiture of guaranteed money. In other words, if Shemar Stewart would happen to do something wrong, get in trouble, that the Bengals would have a right to not pay him some of that guaranteed money. And that language has not been in place before for their previous first-round draft picks. Last year, pick number 18, Amarius Mims, did not have that language. And now the Bengals want to put that language in the contract of pick number 17 this year, Shemar Stewart, who's been adamantly opposed to that. Look, there's no disagreement, no arguing over the terms of the contract. The money is slotted. Everybody knows what Shemar Stewart is going to get. They just can't agree on this language. And right now, of the 257 draft picks that were made in April, the only 2 that haven't signed right now are Quinshon Judkins, who obviously had a domestic violence incident that has been investigated in Fort Lauderdale a couple of weeks ago, and Shemar Stewart. So he is the lone unsigned first-round draft pick. He is one of 2 unsigned draft picks, and they're fighting right now over language. And in the interim, he's not showing up. Trey Hendrickson's not there, and that's not how you want to open camp for a defense that certainly needs to show improvement.
You know, Adam, I've been there, and look, if you get in a room with an agent and you're trying to figure out language, there is a reasonable solution. I've been there multiple times in my career, and you could figure out, maybe it comes down to being, convicted of something. Maybe it's, hey, if he gets arrested, but he's not convicted, then the guarantee stay. There's enough ways to figure out a landing spot. Maybe you give him something else in his contract that people around him don't have. So there's enough clubs in the bag, guys, to get this solved. I would be floored if this doesn't get worked out in the next couple of days. I think this is one that's easily solvable. I think Trey Hendrickson became more complicated once we saw the numbers for TJ Watt, and certainly Micah Parsons could impact that as well.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was, we were together with the New York Jets when Darrelle Reeves was going through their holdout, and
Thanks, Stewart.
Yeah. And listen, it was an annoyance. There's no question about it. But ultimately, the deal got done. I think the bigger thing for me is that you're talking about two key cogs that it's supposed to help your defense. Remember, this Cincinnati Bengals defense was one of the worst defenses in the National Football League. They have a new defensive coordinator in Al Golden. And can you imagine you're Al Golden right now? You're trying to get this thing going. You started in training camp. And two guys that you're depending on heavily isn't even in training camp right now. That is not the direction you want to get going in your first training camp as a new defensive coordinator.
Certainly not. A lot of issues for the Bengals, who are hoping for a better start to 2025. They're 1-11 under Zach Taylor in the first 2 weeks of the season.